Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali died on June 3, 2016 in a Phoenix hospital at the age of 74. Before the fall, understand the height. He won Olympic gold as a light heavyweight in Rome in 1960 at 18 years old, then turned professional and became the first fighter in history to win the lineal heavyweight title 3 separate times. First from Sonny Liston in 1964, then from George Foreman in the Rumble in the Jungle in 1974, then from Leon Spinks in 1978.
He didn't just win fights, he rewrote what a heavyweight body was supposed to do, moving with the footwork of a much lighter man, while backing it with a personality that made him the most recognized human face on the planet. The downfall wasn't one punch, it was the sum of thousands of them.
Wars like the 15-round trilogy finale against Joe Frazier in Manila in 1975, a fight so brutal Ali later said it was the closest thing to dying he'd ever felt, left microscopic damage in his brain with every exchange, the kind of repeated trauma doctors now associate with chronic degeneration of dopamine-producing brain cells.
At the time, it was simply diagnosed as Parkinson's syndrome in 1984, just 3 years after he retired. Over the following 3 decades, that damage stripped away his motor control and his voice, the same voice that once talked faster than his hands moved, reducing the man who wrote his own poetry on live television to a whisper. By 2016, his body had grown fragile enough that a routine infection turned lethal. It triggered septic shock, a state where the immune system's own runaway response collapses blood pressure and shuts organs down one after another. That cascading organ failure is what finally killed him, and he was buried in his hometown of Louisville, Kentucky, in a funeral procession that drew hundreds of thousands to the streets. The irony is brutal. The most mobile, most vocal athlete of the 20th century spent his final years nearly frozen and nearly silent. Beaten not in a single round, but by the accumulated weight of every round he ever fought.
Benny Kid Paret.
Benny Kid Paret died on April 3, 1962 at the age of 25, 10 days after the fight that killed him.
The power stat first. Paret was a Cuban welterweight champion who had already won the title, lost it, and reclaimed it, building his career on a trait that sounds like a strength and turned out to be a death sentence: his ability to absorb enormous punishment and keep coming forward.
On March 24, 1962, in a title defense against Emil Griffith, broadcast live on national television, that trait killed him. The build-up to the fight had turned personal, with Paret publicly taunting Griffith over his sexuality at the weigh-in, and Griffith carried that rage into the ring. Trapped against the ropes in the 12th round, Paret was hit with roughly 17 to 29 unanswered punches in under 7 seconds, a rate of fire the referee, Ruby Goldstein, was too slow to stop, frozen by the speed of the exchange in front of a national television audience. Each blow slammed Paret's brain against the inside of his own skull.
That repeated deceleration tore small blood vessels on the brain's surface, causing subdural bleeding, blood pooling between the skull and the brain that builds pressure with nowhere to escape. Paret collapsed into a coma in the ring and never woke up, dying 10 days later. Griffith, by most accounts, was never the same man again, and Goldstein never refereed another professional fight.
The postscript changed the sport. His death, playing out live in millions of American living rooms, triggered a wave of state boxing commission reforms around referee stoppage standards and accelerated the decline of network television boxing, meaning the very medium that killed him helped end the era that made him famous.
Rocky Marciano.
Rocky Marciano died on August 31, 1969, one day before his 46th birthday. His power stat needs no embellishment: 49 wins, 0 losses, including a career-defining knockout of an aging Joe Louis and a title-winning knockout of Jersey Joe Walcott, the only heavyweight champion in history to retire completely undefeated, a record that still stands more than 70 years later.
His downfall had nothing to do with an opponent. He had flown into Des Moines for a speaking engagement and, wanting to surprise his family on his birthday, boarded a small private plane that night bound for a nearby airfield. The pilot was not certified to fly using instruments, meaning he was legally and technically unequipped to fly in poor visibility. That night brought exactly that: low cloud cover and fading light. Without the instrument training to navigate blind, the pilot lost his bearings in the dark, and the aircraft went down in a field short of the runway near Newton, Iowa, killing everyone aboard instantly. The irony is mathematical. A man who spent 19 years and 49 fights making sure he was never on the losing side of a decision was killed by a single uncontrollable variable: a pilot's missing certification and a bank of clouds.
Joe Louis.
Joe Louis died on April 12, 1981, at age 66 in a Las Vegas hospital, hours after suffering cardiac arrest. His power stat: heavyweight champion for 11 years and 8 months, the longest reign in the sport's history, with 25 consecutive successful title defenses, still an all-time record across every weight class. And his 1938 knockout of German Max Schmeling made him a national hero at a moment when the fight carried enormous symbolic weight against Nazi Germany.
His downfall was financial, and it compounded for decades. During World War II, Louis fought exhibition matches with his purses donated to Army and Navy relief funds, but the IRS still taxed that donated income as personal earnings.
Combined with a mismanaged tax shelter from his promoters, it left him owing the government more than $1 million, a debt that, with penalties and interest, he could never fully outrun, even after returning to the ring well past his prime just to keep earning. A comeback that ended with a brutal 1951 knockout loss to a young, undefeated Marciano.
The financial strain compounded his physical decline. Years of hypertension and a prior surgery for an aortic aneurysm left him confined to a wheelchair for much of his final decade, and he was briefly hospitalized for paranoia and drug-related psychiatric issues in the 1970s. On the night he died, he had been watching a heavyweight title fight at Caesar's Palace, the same casino where he'd spent his final working years as a greeter, shaking hands with tourists who often had no idea the man opening the door for them once ruled the world. The postscript is the cruelest part.
The most dominant heavyweight champion in history spent his last years paying off a debt to the same country he'd represented in the lobby of the very casino that once profited from his fame, before being buried with military honors at Arlington National Cemetery.
Salvador Sanchez.
Salvador Sanchez died on August 12, 1982 at 2 a.m. at the age of 23.
His power stats: WBC and Ring Magazine featherweight champion with 10 successful title defenses in just over 2 years, including wins over Danny Lopez, Wilfredo Gomez, and Azuma Nelson. A resume that had him ranked among the greatest featherweights ever before he'd even hit his prime, and earned him the nickname Iron Lung for a stamina that never seemed to fade in late rounds. His downfall was mechanical and instantaneous. Driving his Porsche 928, a 4.5-liter V8 Grand Tourer capable of speeds well over 140 miles per hour on an unlit 2-lane highway outside Querétaro, Mexico, Sanchez attempted to pass a slow-moving cargo truck at high speed in the dark. He misjudged the gap. His car drove directly underneath the rear of the truck bed, and the truck's frame crushed down through the Porsche's roofline.
The impact drove the steering column into his face and fractured his skull. He was killed instantly before his car had even come to a stop. 2 men riding in the truck survived with only minor injuries. He had been scheduled to defend his title against Juan Laporte at Madison Square Garden just over a month later, a fight that went on without him.
The postscript is physics, not fate. The most technically gifted craftsman the featherweight division had ever produced, a fighter famous for precise distance and perfect timing, was killed by a single miscalculation of distance and timing on a dark road. The exact skills that made him untouchable in the ring, failing him for 1 second behind the wheel.